Hello and welcome to this edition of World at War. My name is Mohammed Saleh. The first time Russia used a North Korean manufactured ballistic missile on Ukraine was on the 30th of December 2023, when Russia had struck the Zaporizhia region. And since then, Moscow has repeatedly deployed North Korean missiles, especially the Warzones 11 series, to carry out strikes deep inside the Ukrainian territory. While the flow of Western weapons into Ukraine to fight against the Russian onslaught has been patchy in the last 6 months, Russia has managed to dramatically increase its own weapons production capacity. Moscow has also been aided well by Iran and North Korea. Even though both Iran and North Korea are under international sanctions over their missile programs. But what will come as a surprise to many is that the North Korean missiles use at least about 290 non-domestic electronic components that are predominantly manufactured in the United States of America. And these North Korean missiles that are powered by American components have been used in the Ukraine war theatre. Our next report gets more details. This CCTV footage, captured on the 29th of April in the Ukrainian port city of Odessa, will give you a glimpse of the kind of firepower that Russia has deployed in this war. The series of explosions resulted in the deaths of 5 people, while 32 others sustained some serious injuries. One of the structures that was struck in this attack is the beautiful building of the Odessa Law Academy, that is also known as the Harry Potter's castle due to its ornate design. According to the Ukrainian Navy, this attack was carried out by Russia using the Iskander-M ballistic missile with a cluster warhead. A prominent former Ukrainian member of the parliament, Serhiy Kivalo, is said to be one among those who've been injured. And then on the 2nd of May, a Russian missile struck the postal depot at the port of Odessa, sparking off a massive fire. At least 14 people are said to have been injured in this incident. Besides the port of Odessa, another region where Russia has been turning on the pressure on the Ukrainians is in the north, where Kharkiv has come under repeated attacks. On the 30th of April, guided bombs were used to strike a village in the Kharkiv region, resulting in one individual getting killed.
At 10:05 a.m. today, the enemy once again struck a civil site. A guided aerial bomb, preliminary OMPB-30. A man died that worked here. His name was Alexander, and on May 5, he would have turned 26 years. Unfortunately, 4 more civilians were wounded. There is no military object or equipment here.
This week, the Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Alexander Syrsky, admitted that the position on the front line has deteriorated and that Russia has made a number of battlefield gains. The promised American weapons, though impressive on paper, are yet to reach the front lines, and this has dampened the morale of the soldiers holding the Ukrainian positions.
Of course, we don't have enough shells. If we compare with the beginning of the full-scale invasion, when we fired up to 100 shells a day, then now, when we fire 30 shells, it's a luxury. We may be given 5 or 6 shells, but more often, we're not allowed to fire. We used to target military vehicles a lot, and we saw over streams where and what we hit. But now, we're often not allowed to fire. Sometimes, we fire in response to the Russian attacks on our personnel, so that they cease fire.
So while the Ukrainians struggle to find enough ammunition to fire the Russian positions, the Russians have been firing a steady barrage of North Korean missiles on different Ukrainian strongholds. And what is especially galling for the leadership in Kiev is that the North Korean Warzones 11 missiles landing up in Ukraine are all manufactured using American electronics. Since September 2023, North Korea has sent a staggering 6,700 containers carrying millions of ammunition to Russia in exchange for food and other raw materials that are required for manufacturing weapons. Pyongyang has sent at least 3 million 152mm artillery shells that have made a huge difference on the battlefield. The West too is now upping the ante. Besides the long-range ATACMS that have been sent by the United States, what is extremely concerning is the rhetoric that the Western leaders are now resorting to. Britain's Foreign Secretary David Cameron has now gone as far as to say that Western weapons can now be used by Ukraine to strike at targets even inside of Russia.
In terms of what the Ukrainians do, in our view, it is their decision about how to use these weapons. They're defending their country. They were illegally invaded by Putin, and they must take those steps. We don't discuss any caveats that we put on those things, but let's be absolutely clear. Russia has launched an attack into Ukraine, and Ukraine absolutely has the right to strike back at Russia.
The Russians immediately hit back at this statement as a dangerous escalation, saying that the proxy war by the West is now a flat-out military contest.
On May 2nd, the former Prime Minister, current Foreign Minister of Britain, David Cameron, during an interview to Reuters agency, suddenly claimed that Ukraine has the right to perform strikes, as he said it, against the Russian territory, using British weapons. There was a formidable fuss in the world's media, British included. Why so? Because it's the first time that a Western politician admitted something that is already an open secret to all the countries of the world's majority. The West is conducting a flat-out war against Russia with the hands of the Ukrainians.
European leaders are increasingly realizing the stakes of the Ukraine war. Macron has repeatedly insisted that he won't rule out the possibility of French soldiers fighting in the Ukraine war theatre. And the question now is, how many more steps will the two sides go up the escalatory ladder before this war becomes an all-out confrontation between Russia and NATO? For more than a fortnight, some of the topmost universities in the United States of America have been gripped by protests and clashes on campus. The anti-war and pro-peace students have been protesting against the Israeli onslaught on Gaza and have been demanding for an immediate ceasefire. A key demand of the anti-war and pro-peace students is that their institutions must financially divest from Israel and companies that profit from the war. The campus protests have now spread to nearly 140 colleges in at least 45 states and also at least 6 other nations outside of the United States, including France, Australia, the United Kingdom and Canada. More than 2,000 anti-war and pro-peace protesters have been arrested nationwide by the police in the past fortnight in a very brutal police crackdown at several campuses. Our next report gets more details.
Free! Free Palestine! Free
Palestine!
US college campuses have been rocked by the most sweeping and prolonged unrest since the anti-Vietnam War protests of the 1960s and 70s. From coast to coast, a wave of anger and defiance is sweeping across the campuses of top US colleges. A movement that began on the 17th of April with only 70 students at Columbia University in New York City has gone from strength to strength despite arrests and threats of suspension. Students are furious over the Israel-Hamas war and the ensuing humanitarian crisis in the besieged Palestinian territory of Gaza. More than 34,500 Palestinians, mostly women and children, have been killed in Gaza by Israeli forces since the beginning of the Israel-Hamas war on the 7th of October last year. Columbia University, which is at the heart of the movement, was flooded by police in riot gear on the 30th of April in order to evict Hamilton Hall, occupied by the anti-war students.
1, 2, 3, 4. Occupation no more.
Hamilton Hall, which has a long and illustrious history of student protests, was renamed Hind Hall by the occupying students early on Tuesday in honor of 6-year-old Hind Rajab, who was killed alongside her family by Israeli forces in Gaza on January 29 this year. Helmeted police were seen climbing into Hamilton Hall via a second-floor window they reached using a laddered truck, before leading handcuffed students out of the building into police vans. But much worse was in store for the students of the University of California in Los Angeles early on Wednesday morning. A masked pro-Israeli group arrived on campus, tried to dismantle the camp on Dixon Plaza. And then, when the anti-war campers rallied to defend their makeshift space, they were assaulted. The counter-demonstrators threw fireworks, tear gas, water bottles, and attacked the campers with bats. Making matters worse was the limited and delayed police intervention, which the Office of California's governor criticized and deemed unacceptable. Students on the front line of the protests narrated harrowing ordeal of being arrested and detained by the police early Thursday.
After attack by Zionists and Proud Boy white nationalists yesterday, we had 25 hospitalizations because our people had their heads split open by padlets and wooden and stumps that were thrown at us. And not a single person who perpetrated these attacks was arrested. Not a single one. And the police response wasn't until 2 hours later. For us, they've always been surrounding us. They've always been spying on us from the building, and they came with the dispersal orders, and in the middle of the night.
The U.S. President Joe Biden, who had remained tight-lipped till the UCLA Gaza protest camp was cleared, broke his virtual silence, saying the United States was not authoritarian, but insisted that order must prevail.
We've all seen the images, and they put to the test two fundamental American principles. The first is the right to free speech and for people to peacefully assemble and make their voices heard. The second is the rule of law. Both must be upheld. We are not an authoritarian nation where we silence people or squash dissent. The American people are heard. In fact, peaceful protest is in the best tradition of how Americans respond to consequential issues.
Extending a ray of hope, a handful of institutions, including Northwestern, Brown, the University of Minnesota, and the University of Vermont, have reached agreements with the protesting students over divestment matters. Arrests, though, have taken place in other universities, including Yale, Dartmouth, University of Texas, etc. But will they deter the students who have felt the moral impetus to act against the violence being perpetrated in Gaza? Look at it any which way. History is in the making, and students are not merely witnessing it, but being an active participant.
It's time for a short break now, but don't go anywhere, for on the other side, we'll take a look as to why people in Armenia are staging a protest as the Armenian government has announced that it will be ceding 4 villages to Azerbaijan. That's coming up next.
India's poll juggernaut reaches halfway mark. 10 states, 2 union territories with 94 constituencies vote in Phase 3. Spotlight on Prime Minister Modi's home turf, Gujarat, Goa and Karnataka. Key union ministers and opposition leaders among 1,351 candidates whose fate will be sealed in the balance. Watch Lok Sabha polls Phase 3. Continuous coverage on May 7th, only on WION World is One.
This week on the West Asia Post, Israeli tanks are waiting outside Gaza border. US says it remains opposed to Israel's Rafah invasion, and pressure is mounting on Netanyahu to free the hostages. Fears loom over a war spillover as Hezbollah launches its deepest attack on Israeli territory. Also on the show, we tell you about Iraq's strict clergy rules and how its harsh anti-gay law has caused alarm. All this and much more on the West Asia Post at these times only on WION. World is One.
Over 200 people die following flash floods that rocked Kenya and Tanzania concurrently, with authorities announcing forceful evacuations of vulnerable residents. There is a new war front in Sudan. Brutal attacks by the Arab-dominated Rapid Support Forces on ethnic African civilians in Darfur has claimed thousands of lives. The United Nations sounds the alarm. And a former Kenyan rugby player turns into a roaming chef as he acquires TikTok fame. Dennis Ombachi will be featured on World of Africa at these times on WION World is One.
Welcome back. Now, the Caucasus arch force, Armenia and Azerbaijan, have been locked in a bloody conflict ever since the breakup of the Soviet Union more than 3 decades ago. They fought 2 wars in the 1990s and then again in 2020 over the mountainous territory of Nagorno-Karabakh, which Baku had recaptured in a lightning offensive last September. Peace, however, has remained elusive, though, and fears of a renewed conflict always lurk just round the corner. After the Armenian Foreign Ministry announced on the 19th of April agreements between Yerevan and Baku on border delimitation, residents of several villages in Armenia have been protesting over the ceding of 4 abandoned border villages to Azerbaijan. In our next report, gets more details.
The decades-long conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan in the southern Caucasus region, after a brief lull, is once again threatening to escalate. The latest flare-up was ignited after the 2 countries began physical demarcation of a contested border section in a bid to move closer to a peace deal, which has proven to be elusive up until now. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's decision to return 4 abandoned border villages seized by Yerevan in the 1990s has not gone down well with the Armenians.
We will not give up even 1 centimeter. We will not give up. We will not give up. We will shed blood, but we will not give up. At my age, I will go on my knees, but I will not give up.
Though the settlements are deserted, they are of strategic significance, as they are close to landlocked Armenia's main highway north towards the border with Georgia. Additionally, the region is near a Russian gas pipeline and has advantageous military positions. Though the Armenian Prime Minister has defended his decision to return the 4 frontier villages, he has faced accusations of acting unilaterally without any guarantees in return.
The people's demand, first of all, is to abandon this illegal process. This process can be conducted under one condition, when the people stand for it. For this, it must be put to a referendum. The issue of changing borders must be put to a referendum, and not one person decides what to do.
Angry protesters blocked several roads across the country, including in the capital, Yerevan, in response to the territorial concessions, and have vowed to fight for the land they consider rightfully theirs. In practice, the handover involves only 2.5 villages, because Azerbaijan already partly controls the settlement involved. The ex-Soviet republics have had a tumultuous history and have called the border delimitation an important milestone. Azeri President Ilham Aliyev last month had said that a peace deal between the countries was closer than ever before.
I think that we are close, and maybe close as never before, because we've never been close during the times of occupation. We could not agree on basic principles at that time.
Will this demarcation of the border, considered a significant event by both Baku and Yerevan, lead to a much sought-after peace deal or blow up into a full-blown crisis? Only time will tell.
The southern Caucasus nation of Georgia has been rocked by anti-government protests since the 9th of April. The protests erupted after the ruling Georgian Dream Party announced plans to reintroduce a legislation which critics say mirrors the authoritarian law that Kremlin uses to crush dissent. The Georgian government has rejected the comparison to the Russian legislation, insisting that the law would boost financial transparency of the NGOs funded by Western institutions. Crucially, on May Day, the Georgian parliament voted to approve the second reading of the controversial bill. A third and a final vote in the parliament is expected on the 17th of May, and it is now needed for the bill to become a law. Our next report gets more details.
We should have a free country.
For almost a month now, protesters in Georgia have been taking to the streets of the capital, Tbilisi, and several other cities, after the government announced on the 3rd of April that it would reintroduce a foreign agents bill, renaming it a bill on the transparency of foreign influence. The controversial bill requires media and non-commercial organizations receiving more than 20% of their funding from abroad to register as agents of foreign influence. Protesters say that the bill resembles a repressive Russian law on foreign agents used to crack down on dissent. The bill cleared its second reading in the 150-member Georgian parliament on May Day with a vote of 83 to 23. The leader of the main opposition party, though not hopeful, denounced the law and appealed for its withdrawal.
If you're not interested in my injured eye, if you're not interested in how the leader of the main opposition party has been beaten up, for the sake of those young people who were injured, who were beaten in the head and bruised, I want to ask you once more, even though I do not have any hope, maybe you will withdraw this rule. There are only 5 months left before the elections. Maybe I could not manage to ever see from the eye, but the country will see the truth.
A day before, the Georgian police violently broke up a demonstration against the bill by firing tear gas, rubber bullets and stun grenades. Water cannon was also deployed to disperse protesters. Reportedly, in the brutal crackdown, the protesters were beaten up and at least 63 were arrested. Following the approval of the second reading on Wednesday, thousands of protesters continued to protest late into the night, shutting down central Tbilisi.
With the second hearing, the law has been passed, which is absolutely ridiculous and stupid things to do in this situation right now, when you are seeing people this many here, and we are gonna stand till the end, till the very end, because there is the third hearing on May 17th, and we're not gonna lose the sparkle. We're not gonna lose our power and lose our drive. We're not gonna do it.
Last year as well, the government's attempt to introduce the Foreign Agents Bill was thwarted in the face of massive street protests. A former Soviet republic, Georgia has sought for years to deepen relations with the West. A 2023 poll found that more than 80% of 3.7 million Georgians supported joining the European Union. The ruling Georgian Dream Party, though, has been accused of steering the nation towards closer ties with Russia. Reportedly, Georgia's Orthodox Church, one of its most respected institutions, has called for the government and the protesters to hold talks in order to peacefully resolve what it described as a political crisis. Will the crisis be peaceful fully resolved, or is Georgia heading for even more turbulent times?
We will fight till the end.
And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of World at War. And if you want to reach out to me with any comments, feedback or suggestions, please feel free to do so on the ID that you see on your screens. I'm your host, Mohammed Saleh, and I'll see you again next week.